It's sad to think that kids today won't get their own Pee Wee Herman. It's a name millions of people know, but it has a sound attached to it as well. The laugh of Pee Wee himself. He didn't follow the guidelines of what humor was already established in the zeitgeist at that time. He made a whole new path of silliness and funny, simple and effective for kids and adults. The story of Pee Wee has many turns, but one thing everyone can agree on is that in the end, the character of Pee Wee Herman survived, but we lost its creator in secret. Then, not realizing what a gem of a person Paul Reubens was, gentle, sweet, and a genius. Sadly, most don't even know how big of a genius Paul really was, and that he was unbelievably talented. In the end, a sickness that lingers in the world took him, but a big life finds speed bumps along the way until it gets to the end of the road. This is the loss of Paul Reubens.
Paul Reubens, Pee Wee Herman here.
Pee Wee is a conglomerate of me and a couple of other little kids that I knew when I was a little kid.
In 2017, Paul finds out that he's been walking around with cancer. At first, it's just leukemia. He accepts what he's told and seeks treatment. He keeps the diagnosis extremely private. He's still a working actor that doesn't need any setbacks. Mostly his work is steady, voiceovers, and small parts in TV shows from here to there. But in just 6 years, he will die to the disease that he's just been told about. The year prior, Paul had been in celebration from his newest Pee Wee movie that premiered on Netflix. Fans of Paul loved what he continued to do with the character of Pee Wee. Pee Wee in general was a gigantic icon and shaped the way for new laughter. Pee Wee's big adventures was weird, unique, but funny. For adults and kids, they both got it. Even for a very young child, the film would grab their attention with the odd giggles of Pee Wee, but the laugh was heard and replicated by everyone that heard it. Pee Wee was ahead of his time. If only he had the ability to find himself in the day and age of YouTube today, he may have been even bigger, who knows. But nonetheless, Pee Wee was at the right moment in time, it seems to be. There's no doubt he is a strong layer in comedy, whether you know it or not. Everybody's got a little Pee Wee in them. As Paul's character made him a household name and wealthy in the 1980s, it built his life and allowed him to buy a house on the mountains of Hollywood, where he would live to his last days. Paul was a real actor that worked the circuit in Hollywood, but like any other actor, he had his moments of dark times where mistakes were made and almost ended his career. To set the story straight with the dealings with Paul being arrested and one of the first people to be canceled in Hollywood going into the 90s, the real story needs to be told. In 1991 in Florida, Paul was arrested unknowingly to the public for a moment. He was in a raid by undercover detectives in a theater playing adult films. Paul was in the theater. He was arrested along with other men that day, and he was charged with indecent exposure in public. Police at first didn't know who Paul was, as he didn't look like himself, although he was in a place that was dark and private where men paid for this, along with other grown men that were in this environment. When Paul is taken to the police station, he finally comes clean of who he is and not wanting to lose his deal with CBS that carried his show, Pee Wee's Playhouse. Paul says who he is and tries to make a deal with authorities, trying to simply just walk away with a slap on the wrist and pay his fines, and saying that he'll attend a children's benefit. The police department declined the offer and pressed charges. The story would simply blow up when a reporter saw Paul's mugshot and brought the story to light, making it into something it wasn't. Lies were spread, and the story was turned into something it just simply wasn't. A story was released that Paul was out in the open, in broad daylight, exposing himself to people, which was simply false and not true. Paul's lawyers fought the case, and fans of Pee Wee even joined in, begging CBS to put Pee Wee's Playhouse back on television, as they had pulled it down. Finally, the case is settled in some time, and Paul fights to pull himself back up, but Pee Wee doesn't recover for some time. This could have been the end for Paul as we know it, but really, it was a new start and directed him somewhere different in Hollywood. Pee-wee was put on the back burners and always in Paul's back pocket, but it would take some time for Pee-wee to show his face again. In the 1990s and early 2000s, Paul starts to grab little roles in films that weren't big parts or big movies really at the time, but now are looked at as classic movies that people love and are really comfort films. Some roles that Paul takes become huge characters that grab people's attention more than they were meant to. But through the decades, Paul works, popping in and out of movies. Some you know, and some you may not even know that Paul was in the background. Paul finds himself in the new 2000s, in the new Hollywood, but he's met with expensive legal problems and back in the grips of authority again. Paul has a warrant out for his arrest, so with that, he turns himself in. The case that Paul is fighting at this moment in his life was a bit more complicated than his last arrest. To put it bluntly, Paul was arrested due to inappropriate pictures of underage men in his home, but you have to dig into the details to get to the full story. Paul paid his bail of $20,000 and was free from jail, but not from the fight. When Paul's home was searched due to a tip, computers and boxes along with materials were taken out of the home and sent to evidence. What came from these findings was told from Paul's lawyers and spokesperson that it was just vintage relics, that some of it was erotic, and the picture that was found was that of a 17-year-old male posing with no clothes. To wrap up the story, Paul comes to an agreement to not spend more time and money and end up in jail. He pays a $100 fine with 3 years probation and registers as a sex offender. Paul is mortified by the outcome. He says that he's a lot of things in an interview. He knows he's weird, but in no way a pedophile. It's another blow for Paul and a very big moment for him in Hollywood. The movie Blow had just come out, exploding in the box office, and Paul himself having a huge part in the movie and getting people's attention with a ton of positive feedback, as though he might make his way back into Hollywood for big roles. But sadly, it's another devastating blow for his career. As Paul enters the last years of his life, he brings back his own creation, Pee-wee Herman. He signs a deal with Netflix and gives his last full movie starring Pee-wee himself. Paul promotes the movie as much as he can, but the film just doesn't find a fan base like it did in the past, bringing Pee-wee back to life in this new decade. It never made it to the spotlight. Paul continues to work on TV shows and on movies, but although right after promoting Pee-wee, he finds out why he hasn't been feeling like himself. The cancer is found in him. He treats it, not even letting some close friends around him know. Paul was really a private person. He was scared of the public, but just like everyone's life, it has to come to an end at some point, it seems. Paul's cancer eventually, in the last few months of his life, starts to completely cripple him. In 2023, Paul knows the end is soon. He takes his last moments with loved ones. It's romantic in a strange way, knowing your last day is around the corner in the next few weeks. Paul takes his last photos and gives a message to the public, but not wanting it released until after he's gone. On July 30th of that year in 2023, Paul succumbs to his illness that's been eating away at his body. His note to the world would say this: "Please accept my apology for not going public with what I've been facing the last 6 years. I have always felt a huge amount of love and respect from my friends and fans and supporters. I have loved you all so much and enjoyed making art for you." So that's it. One in a lifetime person gone, just like that. Hopefully history remembers Paul, remembers characters that he made, but not only that, remembers Pee-wee. The world needs Pee-wee Herman, the one and only Paul Reubens.